You don't plan for your life to explode on a Wednesday, let alone your 25th wedding anniversary, but that's exactly when mine did. Without warning, without mercy, and without a shred of the dignity I thought I still had left. That morning I had stood in front of the mirror, straightened my collar, tucked the velvet box into my coat pocket, and smiled like a damn fool, rehearsing how I'd surprise her with the custom necklace she once cried over in a jewelry store window 15 years ago. I even left work 3 hours early, something I hadn't done in over a decade, because after all the distance and cold silences lately, I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, this one gesture would thaw whatever had quietly frozen between us over the years. I remember thinking, she'll cry when she sees it, but I had no idea who I'd find her crying out for when I got home. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed her car was already there, which surprised me, since she told me that morning she had a late client call and might be home around 7. The house looked quiet from the outside, eerily so, with not a single light on except for the faintest glow in the upstairs hallway, the same one outside our bedroom. I remember stepping inside, carefully closing the door so I wouldn't ruin the surprise, my heart pounding like a kid sneaking cookies at midnight. I called out her name softly, hoping she was in the kitchen or lighting candles or maybe hiding with a grin, waiting to jump out and play along like we used to do back when we still laughed together. But the only sound that greeted me wasn't laughter or the clinking of wine glasses or even footsteps. It was the soft, unmistakable rhythm of moaning, floating faintly down the staircase like some grotesque soundtrack to a nightmare I hadn't yet realized I was already in. I stood frozen in the foyer for a few seconds that stretched into something much longer than time, long enough to realize the voice I heard was hers, breathless and high-pitched in a way I hadn't heard in years. Long enough to realize that there were two sets of sounds echoing from our bedroom, one of them unmistakably masculine, and long enough for my hand, the one holding that little velvet box, to begin trembling so violently that I nearly dropped it. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, the world crashing in silent explosions inside my chest, while upstairs, the woman I'd loved since I was 23 begged another man not to stop. And that's when I knew. Whatever marriage I thought we still had already died long before I walked through that door. I didn't even realize my feet had started moving until I was halfway up the stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath my weight like they were warning me to turn around. Like even the house I built with my own 2 hands was trying to shield me from the final blow I didn't yet fully understand. Each step brought me closer to a truth I didn't want but could no longer avoid, and as I reached the landing, I saw it, not the act itself, but the flickering shadows dancing across the bedroom wall, sharp silhouettes of 2 bodies tangled together, rising and falling with a rhythm so sickeningly intimate that I felt my throat clench and my stomach twist into knots. Her laugh echoed out next, high, breathless, wickedly familiar, and it shattered something deep inside me, something old and sacred and stupidly hopeful, like the last spark of a man who still believed his wife would never do this to him. I stood there in the hallway, less than 10 feet from the doorway, just out of view, listening to the woman I had built a life with whisper things into another man's ear that she hadn't said to me in years. Things I'd begged her to say back when we were still trying to fix what had already silently crumbled. The air was thick with the scent of sex, betrayal, and lavender detergent, the one she insisted on buying even though it gave me headaches, and all I could do was stare blankly as his voice growled something I couldn't quite make out, followed by her muffled giggle and a moan that stabbed through my chest like a knife made of ice. I wanted to scream, to kick the door open and drag that bastard out by his throat, to demand answers, to throw the necklace at her feet and ask her how the hell she could do this on today of all days. But instead, I did something else entirely. I stood there, frozen, completely and utterly still, like a man who just realized he'd been living in a lie, and that the truth had been waiting upstairs all along. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 3 minutes, but eventually, I turned around and walked back down the stairs like a ghost slipping through his own funeral. I just stepped out of that house with the same quiet I'd walked in with, like I was nothing more than a forgotten thought in a life that no longer had a place for me. Outside, the sun had just begun to set, casting long shadows across the driveway, and I remember thinking how beautiful it looked, cruelly beautiful, like a final insult from the universe itself. And as I sat alone in my truck, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, I realized I wasn't just driving away from the scene of her betrayal. I was leaving behind 25 years of my life that, in that moment, suddenly felt like they never meant anything at all. The hardest part wasn't what I saw, it was pretending I didn't. I came home late that night after driving for hours with no destination, circling empty backroads like a man trying to outdrive a memory that clung to the back of his eyes. When I walked through the door, the house was quiet again. No laughter, no shadows, no whispers. Just the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the hallway like a cruel reminder. I didn't go upstairs. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed a blanket, shut myself inside the guest room, and laid on that narrow, creaky mattress like I was a guest in my own damn home. I stared at the ceiling until the first rays of morning bled through the blinds, and when I finally heard her footsteps on the stairs, cheerful and unbothered, I pulled myself together, cracked the door open, and slipped into the role I'd now decided to play. The oblivious husband, the fool with no clue. She walked into the kitchen wearing that smug little half-smile she always used when she thought she'd gotten away with something, hair tied up, wearing the same leggings from yesterday, stretching like a cat fresh from a nap, humming as if the world were perfectly in tune. "You're up early," she said, pouring herself a coffee without looking at me. "We stayed up late last night. Girls' wine night turned into a whole thing. You know how Tina gets after her third glass." I nodded, said nothing, just smiled back like I was brain dead. Inside, though, I was screaming. My mind was replaying every sound, every shadow, every breath I'd heard her take the night before while she was wrapped around someone who sure as hell wasn't Tina. I could smell the lie on her breath, but I didn't flinch. I didn't accuse. I didn't give her even the satisfaction of knowing I knew. That would have been too easy for her. No, I needed more than confrontation. I needed leverage. So that morning, after she left for her Saturday yoga class, I made a list. First, I checked our shared phone plan, a feature she insisted on years ago, ironically to save money. I started tracking late-night texts, odd numbers, gaps in call logs. I installed a voice recorder under the console table in the hallway, one beneath the kitchen bar stool where she liked to sit and gab on the phone when she thought I wasn't around. I logged into our bank accounts and began tracking every grocery store or boutique charge that didn't add up. I started printing receipts, screenshotting statements, and backing up everything to a flash drive I kept duct taped beneath the workbench in the garage. Because this wasn't just about catching her anymore. I already had that. This was about watching her weave lie after lie, day after day, while smiling at me like I was still her loyal lapdog. All while I was laying the trap that would one day snap shut so hard, she'd feel it in her bones. I used to think betrayal was a singular event, a moment that strikes like lightning, fast and devastating, leaving wreckage in its wake. But what I've learned, slowly and painfully, is that real betrayal is patient. It creeps in like rot beneath the surface, spreading silently until the whole foundation of your life collapses under the weight of everything you didn't see coming. What started as a gut instinct turned into late nights hunched over our shared desktop, combing through old cloud backups and archived folders she probably forgot still existed. That's when I found it, an email thread between her and someone named Lindsay. Except Lindsay didn't write like a woman. Lindsay talked about hotel rooms, wine bottle preferences, and how last Thursday was mind-blowing. And when I finally reverse-searched the email address, my stomach dropped into my shoes. Lindsay wasn't Lindsay at all. It was Michael D., the senior marketing manager from her office. A married man with 2 kids. A man I'd met at the last company Christmas party. The same man who shook my hand, smiled at my wife like she was just a colleague, and then poured me a glass of champagne while planning to screw her behind my back. Once I opened the dam, the flood hit me full force. Hidden beneath Lindsay's emails were attachments, flight confirmations, hotel receipts, dinner reservations booked months in advance, all charged to a secondary credit card I didn't even know she had. A card linked to a private bank account in her name, funded by slow, steady withdrawals from our joint savings, all marked as home expenses or yoga retreat prep. She was siphoning me dry, $100 at a time, hiding behind the routine dullness of domestic life to mask the depth of her deception. She hadn't just cheated on me physically. She had been embezzling from her own husband, funding a secret double life with a man who also had a wife and children. And the cherry on top? That necklace I bought her. The one I gave up my weekend shifts to afford. The one I planned for 6 months. She had bought him a watch with that same money just 2 weeks prior. A $700 designer watch, labeled Client Appreciation, on her expense tracking app. I remember staring at the screen, hands shaking, unable to stop scrolling, unable to believe the sheer volume of it all. Years. She had been doing this for years. There were records going back for Christmases, hotel stays booked while she claimed to be visiting her sister, spa receipts while she was volunteering for charity events, and dozens of Uber charges at 1 a.m. that began and ended nowhere near our house. She was a damn professional, not just in the affair, but in the cover-up. And in that moment, in that dark, quiet office lit only by the glow of her secrets, I knew I couldn't just expose her, but in silence, with strategy, because she was no longer my wife. She was the enemy, and I was done being blind. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that when a guilty person suddenly wants to work on the marriage, they're not repenting, they're buying time. A few days after I started gathering my evidence, she hit me with the suggestion like it was her idea of grace. "Maybe we should try counseling," she said one morning, pouring coffee with that same empty calm that made my skin crawl. "We've been off lately. Maybe talking to someone would help." I knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't guilt, it was manipulation. She sensed something had shifted, maybe the way I stopped asking questions, maybe the way I looked through her instead of at her, or maybe she was just trying to get ahead of the wrecking ball she must have felt coming. Either way, I agreed. Not because I wanted to fix anything. No, that ship had burned to ashes. But because I wanted to hear the lies she'd spin while looking a professional in the eye, lies she'd rehearsed, weaponized, and molded into a story where she was the victim and I was the ghost haunting her perfect little world. From the very first session, it was clear she'd come prepared with a script. "He's distant," she said, her voice soft and trembling just enough to sound sincere. "He used to be spontaneous, passionate, but now everything is just routines and silence. I feel invisible." The therapist, a kind-eyed woman named Dana, nodded as if this was all perfectly reasonable, while I sat across the room, watching my wife perform like she was auditioning for an Oscar. "We don't connect anymore," she added, dabbing the corner of her eye like the hurt ran deep. "Sometimes I think he doesn't even love me." And I swear to God, in that moment, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity of it, the pure, venomous gaslighting of sitting in a room and rewriting the truth while she was still sleeping with another man, felt so absurd that my mind could barely process it. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I just nodded, like the good little husband she wanted me to pretend to be, and pressed record on the app running silently inside my coat pocket. We went to 3 sessions. Each time, she told a new version of our downfall, how I'd checked out emotionally, how I never made her feel beautiful or desired, how I worked too much, forgot anniversaries, stopped surprising her with flowers. And Dana, bless her well-meaning heart, kept trying to build a bridge between us, not realizing that one end of it was already burned to cinders. Every word my wife spoke became another nail in the coffin she was building for herself, and I collected every one. By the 3rd session, she even hinted that she'd been tempted, not that she acted on it, of course, but that sometimes women just want to feel seen. I walked out of that office that day knowing one thing for sure. I wasn't just going to expose her lies. I was going to make her regret ever daring to believe she could rewrite our story and make me the villain in her little drama. Because while she was busy spinning fiction in a softly lit therapist's office, I was quietly crafting the truth, and the truth was about to hit her harder than she ever saw coming. They say every man has a line, a threshold he doesn't even know exists until someone stomps on it with a smile. I thought I'd already crossed mine when I heard her laughing in our bed with another man, but I was wrong. The final straw didn't come from the lies she told me. It came from the lies she told about me. I was at a hardware store on a random Tuesday, grabbing a new deadbolt for the garage door, when I ran into Melanie, her old college friend, someone I hadn't seen in months. Her face changed the second she saw me. Tight smile. Hesitant tone. She said, "Hey, I was just thinking about you guys. I'm sorry things have been, hard." I gave her a confused look, and that's when she blinked, like she realized I didn't know. Then she said it. "She told us what you did, about the affair, and the emotional distance. It's just sad, after all these years." I don't remember how I responded. I think I just nodded and walked away. But inside, something cold and dangerous woke up in me, a version of myself I hadn't met before, the version that doesn't forgive and doesn't forget. She wasn't just cheating. She was preparing for a clean exit. She was laying down the foundation of a narrative where she was the innocent one, the victim, and I was the cold, cheating husband who made her feel like a ghost in her own home. She was preemptively poisoning the well, manipulating the people in our lives, crafting a version of events that would shield her from judgment and position her to take everything she wanted when the time came. And I realized right then, this wasn't just betrayal. This was a strategic assault on my reputation, my dignity, and my future. That night, while she was in the bathtub, probably texting Lindsay about how exhausted she was from lying all day, I opened a secure browser and made 3 calls. One to a divorce attorney with teeth, the second to a private investigator who'd been recommended by a coworker who'd gone through something similar, and the third to my bank. From that point on, I stopped being a husband and started being an operator. I set up a new personal account at a different bank under a trust name and began transferring small amounts every few days from the joint account. Nothing large enough to raise alarms, just slow leaks she wouldn't notice. I updated all my passwords, locked my credit, and pulled every financial statement from the last 5 years into a locked folder with a backup drive hidden in my truck's spare tire compartment. The private investigator went to work immediately, and I gave him everything I had: phone logs, addresses, emails, voice recordings. He nodded and said, "You've already done half my job for me. Now let's bury her." I didn't sleep much after that, but the strange thing was, I didn't feel tired. I was past pain now. I was focused. Because she thought she'd get away clean, slip out the back door with my money, my dignity, and the sympathy of our entire circle. But I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to win. And she would never, ever see it coming. You want to know the thing that surprised me most? Not that she lied. Not that she cheated. Not even that she weaponized our history to cast herself as the victim in a story where she was the one digging the knife deeper every day. What shocked me, what truly lit that cold fire in my chest, was how easy it was to build the case that would destroy her. It was like she never once imagined I'd fight back. I gathered everything. Dozens of text message screenshots, complete call logs, emails that detailed meetups thinly veiled as client dinners, and hotel receipts that didn't match a single work event on her company calendar. I printed statements showing steady transfers from our shared savings into her rainy day account, which, by the way, she used to pay for lingerie and spa weekends with the man she once introduced to me as just Mike from work. But the smoking gun? That came from my neighbor 3 doors down, the retired Air Force vet who'd set up security cameras around his house after a string of package thefts. "Yeah, my cameras face the street," he told me. "Why?" "Something happened." I told him I just needed footage of the last couple of weeks. What I found there made everything real in a way that shattered me and steeled me at the same time. There she was, my wife of 25 years, kissing that bastard in our driveway at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, laughing like she was 20 again, climbing into his car in a dress I bought her for our anniversary 2 years prior. They sat for 10 minutes. Then she came back inside. To me. I downloaded the footage, edited it into a file along with the texts, the photos, the bank transfers, and the voice memos. I brought it all to my lawyer, a woman named Allison who'd built her reputation on high-net-worth divorce cases and whose office wall was lined with degrees and framed news articles. She watched in silence, barely blinking, and when it was over, she looked at me and said, "This is surgical." We drafted the divorce papers that afternoon. The assets were protected, the infidelity documented beyond question, and the groundwork laid for full ownership of the house, my retirement, and everything I had built long before she decided to burn it down. Allison asked if I wanted to serve her immediately, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because after everything, after years of being the reliable husband, the provider, the one who never cheated, never raised his voice, never stopped trying to make her feel wanted, I didn't want closure. I wanted clarity. I wanted her to see, for once, what the consequences of her selfishness looked like when they weren't dressed up in romance or wrapped in false forgiveness. I told Allison I needed 2 more weeks. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and said, "When you're ready." What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't just preparing to end my marriage. I was preparing a performance. Because if my wife loved playing roles so much, then I was going to give her the final scene she'd never forget, a live showing of every secret, every betrayal, every calculated move she thought she'd buried. And the best part? She would never see the curtain drop until it was far too late. They say revenge is best served cold, but I served it under soft candlelight with wine glasses clinking and fake laughter echoing through a rented event space filled with our closest friends, her family, my siblings, and neighbors who'd watched our kids grow up. It was our 25th anniversary celebration, the silver milestone she always dreamed of, complete with catered food, white tablecloths, and a big screen set up at the front of the room where she believed a montage of our years together would be the emotional centerpiece of the evening. She had no idea that I hadn't organized this dinner to celebrate us, No, I planned this party as a funeral for the version of me she thought would always be too passive, too kind, too weak to ever hold her accountable. She spent the entire evening glowing like a high school prom queen, basking in the attention, floating from table to table, introducing me to people I'd known for decades as if I were the stranger, and all the while, I smiled back at her like a man seconds away from lighting the match. The speeches began after dessert, her sister said a few words, then her best friend from college, and finally, I stood, lifting my glass and tapping it with a spoon like they do in the movies, the room quieting down into a warm, wine-soft hush. Thank you all for coming, I began, steady and calm. It's been an incredible 25 years, and like every marriage, it's had its moments. But tonight, I wanted to share a special montage. Not just of memories, but of truth. She beamed at me from her seat, holding her wine like royalty, fully convinced that this was the part where I'd show beach vacations, baby photos, our wedding kiss in slow motion. But the second the screen flickered on, the room shifted. At first, it was subtle, the background image of a text conversation, a message from someone named Lindsay telling her she couldn't wait for next weekend. Then came the screenshots, one after the other. Intimate messages, hotel confirmations, pictures of her leaving work and climbing into a car that wasn't mine. The laughter disappeared. The room turned to ice. I watched her face shatter in real time, the color draining from her cheeks, the horror blooming in her eyes as her private life exploded across a 100-inch screen for everyone she respected to witness. Her mother covered her mouth. Her cousin looked away. And one of her coworkers, who must have known Mike from marketing, stood up and just walked out. The final clip was security footage from our street, her kissing him in our driveway before sneaking back into the house like a teenager past curfew. When the screen finally went black, I raised my glass one more time and said, to truth, better late than never. She didn't say a word, didn't cry, didn't yell. She just stood up, shaking, and walked out with every eye in the room glued to her back. I didn't follow. I didn't have to. Because that was the moment she finally understood. The man she betrayed was never stupid. He was just waiting. And now, everyone knew. The very next morning, before the echo of her heels had even faded from the banquet hall, I had the divorce papers served to her at her office, in front of her assistant, a couple coworkers, and, as fate would have it, her affair partner's cubicle just a few steps away. According to the process server, she went white, sat down without a word, and didn't speak for nearly 5 minutes. That was the moment she realized the mask had slipped permanently, the show was over, and every carefully crafted lie she'd sewn into our lives had unraveled in full public view. The envelope held more than divorce papers, it held consequences. The kind you can't wiggle out of with crocodile tears or manipulative charm. She had spent years rewriting our marriage to everyone around her, portraying me as cold, distant, distracted. But the only thing that looked cold now was the empty seat at her desk when she fled the office that afternoon and never came back. When we walked into the courtroom weeks later, she came armed with a lawyer I recognized from a billboard, the kind that promises fair settlements and compassionate resolution. Which would have been adorable if the folder in my lawyer's hand didn't contain timestamps, video footage, account transfers, and 6 different signed affidavits from people who had once believed her sob stories. Her attorney barely lasted half an hour before leaning over and whispering something to her, something that made her face crumple just slightly, like she was realizing she wasn't going to be the one holding the cards this time. The judge didn't need much convincing. With overwhelming evidence of infidelity, financial misconduct, and a documented smear campaign designed to assassinate my character before the divorce even began, the court granted me full ownership of the house, my retirement untouched, and zero obligation to pay spousal support. She walked into that room believing she could salvage something. She walked out understanding that everything she touched had turned to ash. But karma didn't stop there. Through one of the screenshots I'd included in the court file, her affair partner's full name and personal phone number were plainly visible, which meant the moment those files became public record, anyone who knew where to look could connect the dots. And one person did. His wife. She reached out to me personally, a short, polite message that simply said, "Thank you for exposing what I couldn't prove. I've filed for divorce." Within a month, he'd lost his marriage, his house, and as a cherry on top, his job, thanks to his company's strict ethics policy regarding workplace relationships. My wife, now ex, found herself alone, unemployed, publicly humiliated, and unable to comprehend how everything collapsed so quickly. But it didn't happen quickly. No. This was the slow, deliberate fall of someone who spent years climbing a ladder made of lies, and I made damn sure she hit every rung on the way down. Exactly 1 year to the day after I exposed her in front of everyone who once believed she walked on water, I found myself sitting alone on a quiet stretch of beach just outside Clearwater, Florida. The kind of place where the sun feels like a slow exhale and time finally stops trying to outrun you. I had just come back from an early morning swim, the salt still clinging to my skin, and I sat there with a hot cup of strong coffee in my hand, watching the tide roll in like it had nowhere better to be. That was when my phone buzzed. I wasn't expecting anyone. I rarely am these days. Peace doesn't come with a calendar invite, but when I flipped it over and saw her name on the screen, I knew without opening it that it would be another one of those quiet apologies disguised as nostalgia. The preview said everything. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I miss the life we had. I made a mistake. Her message was long, as it always is now. Sentences wrapped in guilt, sprinkled with subtle self-pity, crafted to sound remorseful but never quite accountable, like if she just said the right combination of words. The clock would rewind, and the man who once bent over backwards to please her would still be sitting on the other end, waiting. She talked about how hard things have been, how she never thought people would turn on her, how she's trying to rebuild. Said she's renting a small apartment in a part of town we used to joke about never wanting to live in, that job interviews are going nowhere, and friends don't return her calls. She ended with something simple. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope someday you can forgive me. You were a good man. I stared at the message for a while, not out of indecision. No, that moment had passed a long time ago, but because I wanted to feel something. Anger, bitterness, regret. But I didn't. There was nothing left to feel for her. I locked the phone, slid it back into the beach bag, and leaned back into the chair with a long, slow breath that reached deeper into my lungs than anything had in years. The waves kept coming, rhythmic and gentle, and the breeze carried the scent of something far more important than forgiveness, freedom. Not the kind you announce or celebrate with fireworks, but the kind that grows slowly, silently, until one day you wake up, look around, and realize that the weight you carried for decades isn't there anymore. She had her stage, her spotlight, and her lies. I had my peace. And for the first time in 25 years, I was exactly where I wanted to be, alone, unbothered, and finally, completely free.